Today's episode is brought to you by Alexandra Park BJJ. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a full-contact martial art and combat sport that was developed in Brazil in the 20th century. With roots in Judo and Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, has been developed and refined into a unique grappling art with the aim to allow a smaller and weaker individual to beat a bigger and stronger opponent with the application of proper technique. Based in Muswell Hill, North London, Alexandra Park BJJ's classes are designed so that you can develop your fitness levels, balance, coordination, and flexibility in a no-pressure environment, and to provide the opportunity to start a new sport at a reasonable price. At Alexandra Park BJJ, we aim to be inclusive so that everyone can benefit from this incredible art, not just the athletic or ultra-competitive. To book your free class, head over to alexandraparkbjj.co.uk or email inquiries at alexandraparkbjj.co.uk.
Welcome to Audiobookish, an audiobook review and discussion podcast looking at audiobooks both big and small, as well as radio plays, narrative podcasts, anything audiobook-ish. This podcast may contain spoilers, rants, curse words, mispronunciations of names and places, and more.
Hello everyone and welcome to Audiobookish. This is an audiobook review and discussion podcast. My name is Fahed Rahman and I'm joined by Poppy Knight.
Hello.
And our guest today is Tharusha Gunawardena. He was born and schooled in London. He studied medicine at university and he now works in the east of England as a cardiology trainee. He's approaching the end of his traineeship and his interests include jiu-jitsu, gym, comics. Favorite character is Batman. He's married to Jo, who is a palliative special care nurse, and he has 2 children. He's also the co-host of the Two Medics podcast. How are you doing, Tharusha?
Really good. Honoured to be on here. Honoured to have people ask for my opinions and stuff. I'm not sure what I have to add, but it's a real honour. Thank you so much for asking me to come on.
Cool. So let's get started. So in kind of exchanging the emails between us two, you kind of mentioned that you've got a fairly long commute, which means you've consumed a fair few audiobooks. How did you first come across audiobooks? Was it at a younger age, kind of later on? How did you first encounter them?
Yeah, I mean, I must admit the idea of audiobooks to begin with kind of felt a bit like cheating. Like it felt a bit kind of I was one of those people who didn't like the idea of a Kindle because perhaps the kind of holding a book in your hands thing was just, so it didn't feel quite as real. So I think I was probably quite a late adopter of it until I was forced to kind of do this commute and just needed something to occupy my mind for a period of time. So only really recently. And to begin with, I kind of thought I might try and like learn French or something. And that was disastrous. And then I kind of, well, I think one of my friends just said, "Oh, why don't you just cane through books?" And I found that because the commute just I just kind of zone out and then kind of zone into these audiobooks and never really look back.
Okay, that's great. So we've got kind of a mutual friend in Imran, and so that's how we kind of initially got introduced to each other. And Imran's got kind of had a similar story in terms of like his commute to Basildon as well. So we're going to talk about your 5 favorite audiobooks. Do you want to start off with it doesn't have to be in any particular order, but kind of like what's the first one on your list?
The Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, tell us a bit about that.
It's really awesome. Like one of the reasons why I love it is because the narrator, who isn't the author, does all the voices, and I love a voice. I love a kind of corny voice or whatever. But the cool thing in this is that some of the protagonists aren't human. Like some of them are like spiders and like weird other creatures. And the fact that like if I was to kind of think about what kind of noises or thought processes there'd be for a spider, I mean, it just the fact that this person has like conjured up those kind of sounds and things, I just it kind of blew my mind. It was, and it's a really, really great story where basically, so it's about the future and kind of the fate of the human race And without giving too much away, there are other races competing for survival. And humans, I think, understandably, I think it takes a very kind of neutral perspective on the kind of human condition and how we actually kind of are bad guys to all the other species. And I think it was kind of an interesting stunt. Have you guys read it?
I haven't, no, but it's interesting what you say there, and I won't say too much on it, but the book that we're doing for our next podcast has a very similar thing of taking non-human perspectives, and therefore, a very interesting commentary on humankind and how humans treat other, animals, plants, things like that. So it's really interesting that that's one that you've picked out for this one. Who was the narrator that did those great voices?
Oh, I don't actually remember. Oh, sorry.
That's all right. I'm sure we can find it.
Yeah, but I really loved it. I was really engrossed in it, and I just found it really immersive. So I definitely recommend.
So I've not come across that particular book, but I have read another novel by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I believe it's called The Tiger and the Wolf.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that.
Yeah, so I think, he's a really interesting author because I think he plays lots of Dungeons and Dragons, and that's how he starts kind of his process of building out his world and his storytelling journey from there. So that's a really great. And then when did you how did you discover that? Are you a big like sci-fi and fantasy fan, or is it just something that came up in like the app that you were browsing through?
I mean, I definitely am kind of into sci-fi. That's true, but how did I come across it? I think I was kind of reading the Bobbyverse. That's another audiobook kind of saga, and I love that as well for a very similar reason. Like there are kind of different species, and I think I found it immersive. And so I basically typed into Google, books like that, and then came across that, and just thought it was awesome.
Okay, great. Nice. So what's the next book on your list?
So there's a book called The Five. So The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper, a bit of a dark one, by Hallie Rubenhold. The reason why I liked this book is because it was a kind of different slant on the lives of these women. And essentially they'd kind of been portrayed always as kind of being victims. And the way that they'd been kind of discussed is in the context of being people who are killed by Jack the Ripper. But this kind of looked to reframe that and just focused on their lives. And it just kind of was really... it was interesting. I think for one, the kind of theme of all of them were that they were kind of really vulnerable. And I think it really shows how women were at the mercy of men. And I don't think it's changed an awful lot, but it was just kind of interesting to just kind of reframe that perspective. And I thought it was kind of cool in that way. So that was quite notable.
Yes, I think that's a book I have heard about. And true crime is a genre that's really taken off in the past.
Yes.
5 or 6 years, would you say, Poppy?
Maybe, yeah.
It's especially with the kind of the advent of podcasts like My Favorite Murder and that sort of thing. So what kind of drew to you? Are you kind of a big true crime fan, or is it just, I know it's kind of quite a big book at the time that it came out. What kind of drew you to it?
So definitely not really into true crime at all. And oddly, it kind of came from me looking at books about feminism. And I kind of was going down a bit of a rabbit hole with the kind of Me Too movement and stuff. And I kind of felt like there was just a lot of stuff that was coming up, obviously, that was kind of making me think. And I kind of thought to myself, well, it's all well and good just kind of responding with whatever my limited, very, very limited lived experiences as a kind of man. And so rather than doing that, I just kind of went through, it was part of, there are many, many other books that I kind of thought, it's kind of, for that particular book, it isn't really about their deaths. It's about their lives. And it's just about kind of reclaiming that from the narrative.
Yeah.
Because in the narrative, like, people just assumed that they were all prostitutes, but they weren't. They were just vulnerable women. And so it came from this rabbit hole I went down, basically reading quite a lot of different feminist books. And I didn't want to have, in the 5 books that I kind of mentioned, I didn't want to just kind of go through all of them. But I must admit, that one was one of about 5 in a row I'd read that were just about feminism.
Fair enough.
Okay, that's That's interesting. Who narrated the audiobook? Do you know?
Yeah, Louise Brayley. So it was
Okay.
written by Hallie Rubenhold, and it was read by Louise Brayley.
Okay, that's interesting. In terms of like the mix of audiobooks that you listen to, is it like a 50-50 split between like fiction and non-fiction, or do you kind of skew more heavily one way
Yeah, I think
or the other?
I definitely used to be more fiction, loving the voices and stuff. But then more recently, I think that I've been able to just, or at least I've found it easier to engage more with non-fiction. I tend to listen to it a little bit faster, and I find that if it's about stuff that I'm kind of interested in, it just holds my attention more. Whereas with kind of fiction, sometimes on the commute, I can kind of drift off.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably skewed about 70, maybe 80% non-fiction these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting how kind of like, I mean, I definitely am reading a lot more non-fiction these days than I used to. And I think that's probably the same for you, Poppy, as well. Kind of, you've recently started getting into like autobiographies and stuff like that.
Exactly, yeah. I have only recently come to non-fiction, really, and partly through stuff that we've picked on this podcast, and partly through just finding some really good, autobiography memoir ones. But it's interesting because one of the ones that I guess sort of helped in converting me was No Fixed Abode, which sounds like it does a similar thing to what that one did, in the fact that it focuses a lot on the actual people who are victims of issues. So in your case, victims of Jack the Ripper, in this case, victims of, kind of the failing systems that are causing homelessness and stuff like that. But it very much had it's important that we focus on their lives and who they were as people, not just kind of facts and figures things, or kind of two-dimensional victims and stuff like that. So I think I would imagine, from not having heard this one, that if people had enjoyed that one, that maybe this one would be interesting as well. And then similarly, we've talked about before the fact that the kind of problematic thing about enjoying true crime and stuff like that is that it can, kind of glorify and stuff like that. And so I quite like what you're saying about this one, that it, I guess in some ways, might scratch that itch of true crime stuff, but it's doing it in a much more humane way of, you are considering the people involved, not just, tossing aside.
Definitely.
And,
I think it kind of, in some ways, kind of gives, but even though it's been so many years since they died, it kind of gives them an opportunity to kind of be seen in a different way and empowering in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's another thing with just like history in general. It's very easy to think about people two-dimensionally and think about, but they were in the past. And it's interesting then thinking about them as real people. And, all those funny things that you see, as well as like, famous historical figures, and then you hear about some stupid, embarrassing moment that they had, even just stuff like that. It's quite interesting having to take a step back and go, wait a minute, these aren't just characters. These are actual people with, a whole load of different things behind them.
That's quite an interesting point. So in your podcast, you quite often, one of the main thrust of it is looking at medical Twitter and kind of like responding or replying to tweets. How cognizant are you of the fact that the people who are writing these tweets or posting up on social media are actual real people who might be kind of like going through a moment and stuff like that when you're replying to that? I mean, especially I'm considering some of the more stupid and insensitive things that you might might come across. I
think one of the problems is that, I mean, we're all capable of saying stupid things, right? I definitely am guilty of that. I think so much of what we say, though, doesn't necessarily have to be tied into our core identity, in a sense that I think if you take the approach to life whereby you say stuff, but you're kind of learning and willing to be like called out on it, and have it not mean that you're necessarily a bad person. I mean, obviously there are things that people might say that might be based on a foundation of some sort of ignorance, or maybe some sort of hatred or dislike of some other people. Okay. Well, I mean, that's not okay. But the point is that the point is about, I think the reason why when people get stuck, certainly on social media, is when they kind of double down and they hold a fixed position. But also, I think the kind of circular, like, I've been cancelled and stuff on the internet, I think is when people equate their opinions with, I mean, that are completely immovable, but also they tie it in with their identity. I have so much respect for people who are able to say, you know what, I actually got that wrong, or actually I did consider it this way. and I've learned something or whatever from it.
Just as you've learnt that audiobooks are just as, valuable and worthy as holding the physical book. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Keeping an open mind is important.
Yeah.
I think that's good. So, what's the next book on your list?
Yeah. So, the next book is Written in Bone, and it's by Sue Black, Professor Dame Sue Black, and it's also read by her. She's a forensic anthropologist. And so what she'd do is at crime scenes, she would examine the body and basically tell the story of how that person would have died.
Mm-hmm.
It was amazing. I mean, I don't know if you guys ever watched the show Dexter.
Yes. Yeah. You need to ask Imran about our little in-joke about Dexter between me and him. Yeah. You need to ask him about that. Yeah.
But I will. So this person basically wasn't. I mean, she obviously didn't do the retribution thing, but she was really cool. Like, just like the thought, she'd talk through some notable cases from her past, and she'd. I think the job's changed now, but she is obviously very passionate about her job, and she had some really quite cool stories to tell about just some notable cases. And it's read by her. Really inspiring person. 100% recommend it. It was awesome.
Oh, that's cool. And did you find, like, partly your, obviously, medical knowledge and interest and career and training and all that, did you find that was something, A, that sort of intrigued you to it, or B, that you kind of called upon while you were listening to it, or did it sort of not factor in?
Well, to be honest, like, her level, like, if I was to be put into her working environment, we would be the same, mate. Like, it is just, she's like, her knowledge of like anatomy and just simply the way that things are it's just another plane of existence. So it was, to me, just a completely eye-opening affair. It was amazing. It was really, really good. And she explains it in a really accessible way. So I don't think there really is a lot of jargon. And she kind of really does explain stuff from the ground up. And it's really cool. It's a really wild ride. Like, there is one particular, she was obviously really amazing at her job. And they'd like fly her out to like different countries to kind of investigate different murders for like high profile cases. And they had she kind of built up this really amazing lab. She was based in Scotland. And at one point she went to Italy for a case, and they just didn't have the same level of expertise and technology there. So she ended up taking parts of a corpse in a kind of icebox on the plane back to Scotland. And this is in a time where, this is before you could have like your liquids within a kind of 20ml bottle and all that kind of stuff. She literally took the icebox like onto the plane with her. And she had like this little piece of paper, like loads of people wanted to open the box. She'd be like, oh, hold on. Look at this letter first. And she basically got waved through with no one looking in the box. But, I mean, you could tell it's obviously from a different time, but it's just amazing. Really cool read.
Oh yeah, it's kind of interesting how like medical like procedures have changed. I mean, obviously it's like medical criminal procedures have changed kind of like over time, and I imagine like in a similar case like that, a lot of countries would have a better like technical kind of stuff. But just the idea of like going on a plane with like
a head,
bits of a human being. Yeah. What was the part of the body that they were?
Head, mate. It was the head.
The head.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Gross. So gross.
And I think it's also cool because I think that's one of those jobs that like so many people watch on TV and then want to do. It's like kind of one of the main things of every crime show is, oh my God, I want to be that person.
She's so
I
cool.
imagine, so I imagine for a lot of people that hearing that on the much more accurate sense, but still being just as intriguing and exciting must be really cool.
Yeah, kind of like when it does come to doctor jobs that appear on TV, I think obviously cardiologists are kind of like quite high up on there, and like then obviously people that carry out autopsies as well. I think like radiologists are probably quite far down.
I'll tell him when you said that.
Oh, see, no, because I used to watch a lot of Holby when I was younger, and I actually, for a period of time, did want to be a radiologist because of that. So it faded out quickly, but genuinely, that was for a little bit.
Amazing. You're like the only person who's ever said that in the history of speech.
Yeah. Did anyone ever tell you about like that period where me and him were writing a sitcom? about
What?
his years as a medical student. Did he ever tell you about that?
No, interesting.
Okay, so so me and him wrote wrote a couple of episodes of a sitcom about basically based on the years where he had to retake his final exams in like Basildon, and it's kind of like him telling me his stories and then trying to figure a way how to change the students that he was studying alongside. So they were just like similar enough to make the stories ring true, but like different enough that we wouldn't get sued. So it's like changing people's names and kind of stuff like that. We actually, I mean, obviously it never came to anything because it's not on TV. But I did manage to get one of the like a short snippet for it turned into like a comic book, well, comic strip anyway. So yeah, so you definitely ask him about that. Cool. So what's the next one? What we up to 3 now? I think is that 2?
Yeah,
3. Okay, so what's the next one?
3. I think it's probably a bit of a common one, but Ready Player One. So that was narrated by Will Wheaton, I think. Have you read that? It's
I've not read it. No,
I've heard of it and heard good things, but no, haven't gone around to it yet.
So it's now like it's a Spielberg movie, or at least it's produced by him, and it's about the future. It's another sci-fi one, and it's about the future whereby a lot of people just basically exist in this virtual reality game that essentially takes over most of life. Like most people are just kind of more involved in that than they are in the kind of real world. And the person who kind of creates that world dies. And basically in his last acts whilst he's living, he decides to kind of pass over the ownership of that world, which is called the Oasis, I think, to the person who wins this game, which is within that virtual reality environment. And that book is just chock full of like 80s and 90s sci-fi or kind of nerd references, like the DeLorean from Back to the Future's in it, and there's loads of like cool like video game reference. And it's basically, for like a nerd like me, it's just complete kind of, it's almost like it's fan fiction. It's written by a fan, almost for a fan. Like it's just loads of cool things. There's a bit about like Dune. There are lots of references to Dune, and just it's awesome. It's awesome. And the narration's really good as well. And I think the thing that the book surprised me because it's from the perspective of a kind of a teenage boy. And I thought I'd probably, the teenage years were a long time ago now. And I think I kind of always felt in myself, not always felt, but felt for some time now that kind of perspective is kind of behind me. Like, when you see the Hunger Games and stuff, I'm like, I'm probably a bit old for that. But it's awesome. It really captures the imagination. It's really good. I really love that book.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some like teen perspectives that you can feel like you've outgrown, or and it doesn't quite ring true to you anymore and stuff like that. But it is also definitely a good thing talking about keeping open mind and stuff like that. That there are so many either teen perspective books or full on YA books and things like that can be more than loved by people of all ages and stuff like that, for sure.
Totally.
So yeah, and how did you find the experience of listening to that as opposed to reading it? Like, are you glad that you heard it as opposed to, reading
I loved it. I think my kind of reluctance to read it was from the perspective of, I'm not sure if I'm really going to be able to identify with this character and the perspectives. And, there's love in it and all that. And, but it's cool. It's just like it's a really cool story. And so I think the kind of beauty of kind of books that perhaps do adopt like a different perspective is that if there's like an amazing story, it'll bring you, if it's well told, then you can get into it, so it was awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, that kind of the entire VR world thing, it's not that far off now. I don't think you've got like, the likes of Google and Facebook developing their technologies, but I think there's really interesting things kind of happening kind of on the edges. There's this YouTube channel that I watch called People Make Games, and they do like deep dive investigations on kind of more serious topics to do with like the game development industry, and they talk to a bunch of people that were developing kind of VR experiences. And one of the things they find, it's really expensive to do, so the people developing these experiences will just find cheap, ready-to-made kind of like graphics and stuff like that. And one of the graphic sets was from basically is just like these female manga characters,
Right.
and so these guys would have to kind of have these avatars that were female and.
That's a likely story, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
these are the only ones available.
Oh,
what a
dear.
nightmare.
What will I do?
Yeah, exactly. How
the
convenient.
really kind of interesting thing about being forced to interact with a female kind of avatar with other people in a virtual world was that some of the people kind of it helped them kind of explore different parts of that their sexuality or their gender identity and stuff like that. So kind of one person kind of realized, I'm probably like bisexual, and another person kind of like became a lot more sympathetic to the way women are treated in the world. So I think that idea of virtual reality helping you to kind of try out different identities, I think's really important. And it's a fascinating,
really cool.
exciting, and scary, but really terrifying world as well. So I can imagine why an adventure story set in that environment would be kind of like exciting to kind of listen to. How did you find Will Wheaton's voice? Because I know a lot of people have got like differing opinions on him solely based on his kind of like appearance in Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yeah. See, I love The Next Generation, so I'm just fully on board the Will Wheaton hype train. So I loved it. I loved it. Okay. So I thought it was really good. Yeah, I thought it was really good.
Okay, that's good. That's good to hear. What's the next book? Kind of like, I think if we're coming to your last choice.
One. Yeah. I feel like I had to be on brand. I mean, I wasn't trying to be on brand, but anyway, there's a medical one called War Doctor by David Knott. And the kind of title is Surgery on the Front Line, and it's read by him. And it's basically about this guy who got into medical school in this kind of meandering way. I think he kind of struggled to find his kind of purpose in life, and it's autobiographical. And then he kind of, I think he just really meanders through his career, and then kind of stumbles into volunteer work as a doctor in war zones. And it just talks about his experiences going to war-torn countries and just being amazing. He's just amazing. Like, there isn't really much kind of medical jargon in there. It's just about the kind of having to make do in completely devastated environments. And I couldn't help but kind of just get the entire book. I was just like, this guy is just unbelievable. He's kind of like, it should be fiction.
Yeah.
But like when you see the idea of like in a Holby City or whatever, like doctors have this kind of slightly kind of porcelain, I don't know, like type A kind of personality types and whatever. Whereas this guy, he's like, I flunked my exams, I failed this, I did that and whatever. But then he just goes and is a complete and utter hero. He's a complete hero. And it's just really emotional, and you hear about the kind of losses and just the way, because I think he obviously had to deal with a lot of like seeing an awful lot of awful unjust things, and how he just kind of kept going back to it. He's just a really inspiring character. I was gutted when that book ended. It's just
I think that's a fantastic compliment to give to a book, to be gutted when it's ended. It's an interesting kind of like point. A couple of points that you brought up there. So in your podcast, you kind of mentioned quite a lot how kind of doctors are expected to be kind of like amazing, top of the game, all the time. But doctors are people, and you do have people that do kind of just drift through life until they come across the thing that kind of like gives them purpose. Was that kind of similar to your journey into like cardiology, or was that a field that you were always kind of like interested in doing?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's probably like a mixture of things. Like, I think when my mom was like in labor, she was like, "Oh, my son is going to be a doctor," and so like it was almost like my parents had decided that fairly early on. But I remember when I was kind of like 8, 9, 10, kind of watching some kind of hospital dramas and being like, I don't think I'm being completely thinking along the lines of, I couldn't survive in that environment. I can't handle blood. I'm squeamish. And, but then so I kind of went to and fro. I think I always liked science, and when I was applying to medical school, I thought I was going to be a children's doctor. But for me, it was because it seemed like the idea of charming children and kind of, playing with it, that seemed cute. So that's kind of what I had in mind when I was applying to medical school. It was.
I mean, I think being a children's doctor would be maybe my least favourite. I don't think I would be able to cope. I don't like kids that much. Well, other people's, non-family kids that much anyway.
Fair enough.
But just like the idea of like comforting like terminally ill child, I just think would break me. I think I wouldn't be able to cope with that.
Same. Same. I think it just goes to show how like naive I was, because like who really thinks like that's what a pediatrician does, just plays with children all day? Like that's not what you do.
Dr. Patch Adams. Or
exactly. If only we could all be like that. But like, no, it wasn't. So, and I realized that. And then I kind of did, as part of because when you start as a junior doctor, you go through different rotations. And I remember seeing a guy coming in with like a massive heart attack. And I remember the boss like strolling in. I remember the boss like being like, "Oh, don't worry, mate, we'll sort you out." And he said pretty much those words, "Don't worry, mate, we'll sort you out." And he takes the guy into the cath lab, which is where they perform they do the angioplasty for this guy who's having this massive heart attack. And literally like half an hour later, he's out kind of having a cheese sandwich, And I just remember being like, that's so cool. Like that dude was like having a heart attack, like on the brink of death. And you're just like, "Don't worry, mate, we'll sort you out." And they do. Like, so then after that, I was like, oh, that's what I want to be like. I want to be the kind of person who, when I'm around, people are like, "Oh, Tharusha will sort it out." So, and I think in cardiology, there are lots of opportunities to do that. So I think after that, that's all I wanted to do.
So this is a question I've always wanted to put to like somebody who works in cardiology. What do you think is like harder, like cardiology or like rocket science? Because like those are the two examples that are typically brought up when something's kind of like it's not that.
Definitely rocket science. Definitely rocket science. If someone can explain to me what those Higgs boson particles and stuff are without me going cross-eyed, that would be awesome. It's definitely way harder. If I can do cardiology, literally anyone can. So
this is something that kind of Imran brings up when I talk to him as well. It's kind of like a lot more people are capable of being doctors than are given the opportunity to. And I know that's something you talk a lot about in your podcast, is like educational privilege and educational opportunities being not necessarily available to all those who might be capable of taking them up. Cool. So do you want to talk a little bit about your podcast as well, just to tell listeners about this kind of cool. sort of stuff that you talk about and stuff like that?
Thanks for the opportunity to. I mean, so it's between me and Imran, although we do have a lot of kind of guest hosts who generally are, it's just a cabal of other doctors, I suppose. But me and Imran, we used to kind of talk every so often about what an amazing time we had pretty much at the end of med school, where we went on this kind of trip. So generally speaking, during your medical training, you have a period called an elective, which can be it's about 3 months, where you go to another country. And the idea is that you're supposed to explore medicine in another culture, but we did a very little exploring of other cultures and a lot of kind of like messing about, essentially. And we always used to kind of talk amongst each other about the stories from then. And essentially Imran just like one day said, "Oh, why don't we make it a podcast?" So lots of like funny things that happened and whatever. And then whenever we'd kind of meet up to kind of talk about it, we just ended up talking about stuff we'd seen on social media, just like stupid stuff. And then we thought, oh, why don't we kind of make that into a podcast? And that's pretty much how it came about. So we kind of would be inspired by whatever's in the zeitgeist or whatever people is talking about. So we kind of use Twitter or kind of Reddit or kind of social media as a kind of springboard to give us ideas for current affairs, but things that generally affecting medicine, although we're kind of branching out, because what we are certainly realizing about ourselves as we're kind of getting older is that I think there was a time where being a medic was pretty much like 90% of my personality. Like if I went, I met other people, like that's what I end up talking about. But as time's gone on, obviously, like I've realized that there are other parts of myself that I kind of value and I think have value. And, I'm a father and, I like have other interests. So I think the podcast in a way is kind of hopefully kind of branching out. Just it's still like just me and Imran catching up and fortunately, like, it's cool. Some people listen. Like, if 1 or 2 people listen, then that's awesome. That's that's it.
Yeah, I kind of noticed on kind of reading your bio, kind of like into jiu-jitsu. Is that something that you talk about on the podcast? What style of jiu-jitsu do you train? Is it Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or is it kind of like
so like when I was a wee boy, I did taekwondo, and then I got into Japanese jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And then through that, when I got my black belt in that, like, me and my brothers were really into it. And obviously the UFC was kind of growing from like Tito Ortiz to like Brock Lesnar. And then suddenly it just kind of seemed to just explode. And obviously I had to get into Brazilian jiu-jitsu because, so the Gracies and, the kind of big Brazilian jiu-jitsu technicians who are just kind of ruling the UFC. But then, because that all just got completely flawed with COVID. So I think, the last time I went to a Brazilian jiu-jitsu class was pre-COVID, like 3 years ago.
Oh, wow, dude.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah. It's been a lot. It's been quite hard to like it felt icky, like the idea of like rolling around with other people, when we were still wearing masks and stuff.
Yeah.
But now the problem is now the children are kind of growing up, and although I have talked to my daughter Lily, who just turned 6, into Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I've like planted the seeds there. Like, I've been winding it, like just kind of grinding her down as time's gone on. And the other day she said to me, "Oh, so when are we going to go to the jiu-jitsu lesson?" So I think it's on, man. I think it's on. I think we're going.
That's cool. What belt do you hold in jiu-jitsu?
So in Japanese jiu-jitsu, I was a black belt. In Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I pretty much bounce from one club to the other. So I'm just a white belt.
Oh, okay, cool. You should come roll with me sometime. I'm
you destroy me. Belt. I saw you're a purple belt. Oh god.
Yeah.
You annihilate me.
You come roll with me sometime. It'll be interesting. Next time at one of Imran's barbecues. One of those ones. Yeah. Okay, cool. So thanks for taking the time to talk to us today.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been a blast. Thank you.
Yeah, some really interesting audiobooks. I don't think either me or Poppy have listened to any of those. Have you listened to any of those?
No.
Yeah, so definitely ones to kind of like check out.
Awesome.
From there, maybe future episodes as well. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about or plug?
I'm starting like on TikTok to do like videos basically explaining concepts in cardiology to like people who are interested. So if people have cardiology questions, like about anything, I'm trying to do videos that kind of explain concepts that perhaps would have seemed impenetrable. So my like TikTok handle's Tharusha Rages, because it was originally me just complaining about work, but I figure I should try and do something more constructive. So if people have questions about cardiology that they want me to kind of explain in a way that's accessible, I'd love to try and do that. And so my handle's at Tharusha Rages, and I'm on TikTok.
Okay, cool. And where else can people find you on the internet, on Twitter, social media?
So I tweet a lot on Twitter. It's not really cardiology though. That's me just trying to be funny. So I don't know, if you like bad jokes, then I'm on there. That's pretty much it though.
Yeah. What's your Twitter handle?
Oh yeah. So it's at Tharusha. So THARUSHA . And then a bit of my surname, because obviously my whole name doesn't fit in. So it's like GUNAWA and then 4 for the number of letters remaining in my name. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Poppy, do you want to tell our listeners about the book that we are going to be doing next, if you've got that information in front of you?
I teased it a little bit there with talking about some connections, but we are going to be talking about next time The Island of Missing Trees by Alif Shafak. It's read by Daphne Cuomo and Amira Ghazala. I am about an hour and 20 off the end, and I'm absolutely loving it. So definitely do take a listen to that episode when it's out. Depending on when you listen to this, it might be there already. You can skip right to it. But yeah, I think we're going to have a great chat, and I'm looking forward to it. So yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, that's great. So thank you very much, Tharusha, for taking the time to speak to us today. Let's say bye to everyone.
Ta-ra.
Bye.